Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. So this is something I didn't think I'd ever be talking about, but Baldur's Gate 3 is officially getting a TV series at HBO. Now the show is reportedly going to be helmed by Craig Maizin, who co-created the Last of Us HBO show, and interestingly enough, this isn't just going to be an adaptation of the game's story. Instead, the show is going to attempt to continue the story of Baldur's Gate 3 and its characters. To be entirely honest with you, I don't really know how I feel about this. Looking at this on paper, it does sound like a big deal, and well it is. Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the most celebrated RPGs ever made. It swept award shows, and it brought CRPGs into the mainstream spotlight, and it genuinely felt like lightning in a bottle. So it makes sense to me that from a business standpoint, HBO and Hasbro would want to capitalize on that success by turning it into a TV series. But the thing that made me immediately hesitant was the fact that Larian apparently has zero involvement with this show whatsoever, and that's where my concern as a whole starts. Baldur's Gate 3 only worked because of the insane amount of care, passion and detail that Larian poured into every aspect of it. The companions, the branching narratives, and the way that every choice feels like it has weight. It didn't just happen accidentally. It's clearly the result of a brilliant team that deeply understands D&D and player agency. So when I personally hear that the studio responsible for the game's magic in the first place isn't even involved in continuing the story of the characters they made, it feels pretty strange. And something else that makes this show even more confusing to me is that it isn't retelling Baldur's Gate 3 like I think most of us would have expected. It's instead trying to continue it. To me, that means they're going to somehow choose a canon ending in a game that was specifically designed to avoid having one. Because as we all know, depending on how you played the game, your story could be wildly different to mine. Certain characters could be alive or dead, entire factions could be wiped out, and the state of the world itself could be dramatically different. Baldur's Gate 3 thrived on its abundance of player choice. It's really the core pillar of why the game resonates with all of us so deeply. So again, for me, the idea of a TV show just picking one path and saying, this is what really happened, is a risky move. Now, as for the reported head of this show, Craig Maizin, I find this pretty interesting. Season 1 of The Last of Us to me was genuinely pretty strong, and I think he handled the tone and emotional weight of that world very well. But if I'm being entirely honest, I'm not really a fan of Season 2 at all. To me, certain characterizations felt off, especially for Ellie, and some of the nuance of the second game, which I personally loved, didn't translate very cleanly. So while I definitely respect Maizin as a creative lead, and apparently he's going to play the game itself, that alone doesn't automatically guarantee that any of this is going to work. Now, this is obvious, but the biggest difference between making something like The Last of Us as a show compared to Baldur's Gate 3 is that The Last of Us already had a fixed narrative. The story was about Joel and Ellie. It had a clear emotional arc. Baldur's Gate 3, on the other hand, is a story about your tab, your decisions, and companions shaped by your influence. So translating that into a single linear continuation is inherently a difficult task, because once you remove the player from the equation, you take away one of the core elements that made the experience so special. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom, so I'm not going to immediately write this off. HBO has proven that when they invest properly into a fantasy property, they're able to do it justice. And I think that if this show genuinely focuses on the nuance and personalities of companions like Shadowheart, Astarion and Karlach, while exploring the aftermath of the game's world-changing ending, then maybe there's something interesting here. But I think where I land with what little we know right now is just cautious. I don't necessarily feel like Baldur's Gate 3 ever needed a continuation, especially in TV form. The game itself already feels complete, and it allows you to imagine what happens next yourself. In a way, the ambiguity of wrapping up that journey to me is part of the magic. So once you lock that into a seemingly canon sequel story, you take away that freedom. And again, freedom is kind of the entire point behind Baldur's Gate 3. Anyway, maybe this does turn out to be something incredible. Maybe Maizin and HBO absolutely nail the tone and respect the source material in a way that surprises me and all of you. Or maybe it just ends up feeling disconnected from what made Baldur's Gate 3 such a special experience in the first place. The most iffy part about this entire ordeal is definitely the fact that Larian isn't involved, or at least from what we know. I think if the show wants to have a shot at being something good, there's definitely going to need to be at least some sort of collaboration between the incredible writers at Larian and the writing team for this show. As of right now, I'm not excited, but I'm not outraged either. I'm just curious. And honestly, I think that's the healthiest place for any of us to be with an announcement like this. We of course don't really know anything beyond the show's director and that it's going to continue the game's story, so keeping neutral is probably the best way to go, so you're not overly disappointed if it ends up being bad. As always, I genuinely love to hear what all of you think. Are you excited? Are you worried? Or do you just feel like Baldur's Gate 3 was better left untouched? Please let me know down below. For now though, that's all from me for today's video. If you enjoyed, please consider subbing to the channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 and RPG content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.